Hello and welcome into Women in Literature with Dr. D. As today we're going to be discussing Sylvia Plath's novel, The Bell Jar. I'm Nick Merrick alongside Madison Romine. And the critical lens we want to discuss today is the fact that this novel is pretty much an atypical Bildungsroman.
And it's atypical because not only she's a girl, Jane Eyre has been written, it's been there, done that. But, The Catcher in the Rye is kind of the classic American example of this Bildungsroman.
Yes.
But it's atypical because she fails and fails so miserably. She can never quite cross that bridge into adulthood. She never comes of age. There's no closure. Because Merriam-Webster defines a Bildungsroman as a class of novel derived from the German literature that deals with the formative years of the main character, whose morals and psychological development is depicted. It typically ends on a positive note, with the hero's foolish mistakes and painful disappointment behind him and a life of usefulness ahead. Throughout the novel, we see all of Esther's problems kind of start because she's never had a successful, healthy relationship with a man. Her father dies when she was 9, and she even says that that's the last time she was happy. Yep. And so when her father dies, she kind of goes off into this downward spiral of depression, leading her to 2 different male doctors that we'll talk about a little bit later. First, though, I want to highlight all of her bad romances with guys like Buddy.
Yeah, Buddy's fun. That's an interesting one to bring up too, because it's almost like I'm uncertain throughout the novel whether it's actually love, because yes, she's still dealing with the idea of her rite of passage, going to womanhood, whatever you'd like to call it, but love's something that you want to share with something, and it makes me question it, at least when she says things like this. Ever since Buddy Willard had told me about that waitress, I'd been thinking I ought to go sleep with somebody myself. Sleeping with Buddy wouldn't count, though, because he would still be one person ahead of me. It would have to be with somebody else. I just find it interesting that the fact that Buddy's, it's almost like he's not put up into that typical male role. It's something that you'd want to share with, both physically, both sexually, both emotionally, but then it kind of negates it when you're saying, it doesn't matter, I'm going to go with somebody else.
Exactly. So, and because she's so young, it seems like more of an obsession than actual love, but we do keep seeing Buddy pop up throughout the novel in different capacities. And then after Buddy, though, she goes to a party and is set up on a blind date with a man named Marco. Now, Marco forces himself on her and almost rapes her. And so that clearly is a failure. Yep. And the man she finally does have sex with is Professor Irwin. And now, yes, they actually had sex, and yes, she somewhat, crossed that bridge and completed that task and, came into adulthood somehow, but still she failed in the fact that she was bleeding so much she had to go to the hospital. To quote Esther, I felt the first man I slept with must be intelligent, so I would respect him. Irwin was a full professor at 26 and had the pale, hairless skin of a boy genius. I also needed somebody quite experienced to make up for my lack of it, and Irwin's ladies reassured me on this head. Then, to be on the safe side, I wanted someone I didn't know and wouldn't go on knowing. A kind of impersonal, priest-like official, as in the tales of tribal rites.
She's very interesting to me because one of the things that stands out is actually the fact that she used the word priest-like and associates it with Irwin. It's the fact that, he's of a higher status. Yes, he's a professor at Harvard, and we understand that. He is 26, like I just said in the quote, and like the readers know, so obviously a couple years elder of Esther. But at this time and age for women, there's really 2 choices. It's black or white. It's either you go on, you get married, and you have a family, or you pursue your career. And for Esther, that was being a poet. And earlier in the novel, she actually symbolizes this through the reference of a fig tree. We understand fig trees as being kind of one branch, and it separates its way up off the stem. When she says one fig has a husband and a happy home and children, another fig was a famous poet, and another fig was a brilliant professor. So really early on, we see this almost foreshadowing of a brilliant professor who is Professor Irwin later on in the story. But she's just trying to build off it, but instead of going through the black or white, she almost goes gray, and she's confused in this rite of passage, and she seeks religion. So through that, she goes to the Catholic Church and wants to be a nun. When she says, lately I'd considered going to the Catholic Church myself, I knew that Catholics thought killing yourself was an awful sin. But perhaps, if this was so, they might have a good way to pursue me out of it.
She's almost using religion to force a rite of passage onto herself because, Catholicism has 7 sacraments, and 5 and 6 are either holy orders or matrimony.
Yes.
And so since she wasn't going down the path of matrimony, she was going to try to maybe see what she could do with holy orders. But just as easily as she talked herself into it, she talks herself out of it by saying the only trouble was church, even the Catholic Church, didn't take up the whole of your life. No matter how much you knelt and prayed, you still had to eat 3 meals a day and have a job and live in the world. Now, this is funny and somewhat ironic because through most of the novel, we don't see Esther, eating 3 meals a day, having a job and living in the real world.
Right.
We watch her in a series of mental institutions, being constantly watched by doctors. And, the male doctors we talked about earlier. And first up, we have the psychiatrist, Dr. Gordon, who she sees at her mother's insistence. And to quote Esther, Dr. Gordon's features were so perfect that he was almost pretty. I hated him the minute I walked through the door. Now, this was not someone she was going to tell all of her problems to. She goes on to say, then I thought, how could this Dr. Gordon help me anyways? With a beautiful wife and beautiful children and a beautiful dog haloing him like the angels on a Christmas card. Now, the word haloing, religious buzzword.
Yes.
There we go. And it ties back to your comment that, she's not cut out for this religious lifestyle because she seems to resent him because he's somewhat holy.
Do you feel like through the connection we saw with the priest-like and Erwin, and now the fact of haloing and Dr. Gordon, do you think there's a relationship between the men and religion, or are they kind of just they're 2 separate entities?
I don't know if I would say that there's a definite relationship between the two, but they're definitely grouped to one side. It's
Okay.
men and religion to one side, and then her career, whether it be poetry or being a professor, to the other. But the thing is, she won't get help. Like, she cannot be emotionally intimate with someone who's either religious or a man, and in this case, he's both.
It's interesting that you mentioned that too, because not only will she not get any kind of help, but we've been seeing her through the lens of the mental institute that her mom's wanted her to get her involved with and see the doctor so she could personally get help. She doesn't think she needs it, obviously, but she's having that feeling of being trapped. And one of the situations we see that is when she said, I would simply have to ambush it with whatever sense I had left, or it would trap me within its stupid cage for 50 years without any sense at all. So this quote actually proceeds when she goes through the suicidal thoughts. She mentions trying to drown herself to death. She mentions trying to overdose on pills, and then also the failed hanging attempt. In all those situations, it was failed. So it kind of ties back to that rite of passage and the fact that even through death, if you want to go a rite of passage through death, and she wants to leave this world, she says, forget it. Mental institutes drive me nuts. I want to be a poet. I don't know what's going on in my life. I'm still trying to get to womanhood. She can't even get to death through her passage, so to speak, too. And that seems to be one of her downfalls. So here are some of Esther's suicide thoughts. The fact that these are all failed attempts, it still supports the notion that this is an atypical Bildungsroman. And what we see, it's very methodical. She has everything planned out. But Madison, back to the point you wanted to get to earlier. Even through all the treatment, it's always a male doctor who has control over her life.
Exactly. And Dr. Nolan is the only man she actually trusts through the novel. And even he betrays her by, giving her shock therapy.
Right.
When she did not want to go back there. She hated Dr. Gordon for it even more than she hated him initially. And she resented Dr. Nolan for it. And, but now that she's open to getting help from him, it's a huge step. And so the readers are kind of led to believe that, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the progress we finally have been waiting for her to make. Maybe she's finally going to get somewhere. And, to quote Esther, she said after getting closure somewhat of a closure with Buddy by, I'm sure he'll be back. He's always back. And after she got off the phone with Erwin, and he told her that he'd pay for the hospital,
right,
she finally says, I was perfectly free. And then, so that was after her closure. She was good. She was on the right path. And then when she's going into the meeting to see if, she will be released back into the real world, back to, her 3 meals a day with a job. And she says, but I wasn't getting married. There ought, I thought, to be a ritual for being born twice, patched, retreaded, and approved for the road. I was trying to think of an appropriate one when Dr. Nolan appeared from nowhere and touched me on the shoulder. Dr. Nolan interrupted her epiphany.
Yes.
Just a man, once again, kept her from going through that rite of passage, from becoming who she wants or needs to be. A man, once again, was holding her back.
It's almost that full circle conclusion, the fact that we had the male figure in the beginning, we knew of the past with the father passing away, then we had the whole situation of Buddy, and it literally took her the full 200 plus pages of this novel to maybe get closure, at least put him aside, say, forget it, I need to move on, and that's where Irwin comes into the scene. But even at the reach of an epiphany, you mentioned the male figure stopping it, and on top of that, literally now she's going to be stuck in her madness pretty much forever, and the readers are thinking, no, we were just there, we were making all the progression, I don't know what just happened. And it's left with one of the more famous quotes of the novel, to the person in the bell jar, blank and stopped as a dead baby, the world itself is a bad dream, a bad dream. Well, hopefully this didn't put too much of a downer of the day, but we were just trying to give you some closure on what the novel couldn't. But that'll do it for our discussion. For Madison Romine, I'm Nick Merrick. Thanks for joining us.